Good afternoon. It's just after 1 o'clock. It's Thursday, the 14th of January 2016. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, we've got John Hurst from the British Constitution Group. John is a former police officer. He's going to be... Constable, yeah. Of course. How could I say such a thing? Former police constable. We're going to be talking quite a bit about the law, the courts, what's happening. We're also going to be joined by Guy Taylor by video Skype link. Before we get on to those topics, some comments on the weather. Somebody said, winter at last, I've lit the wood-burning stove. So cold in most places. It's been pretty chilly here in Plymouth. And the reports across the country are, of course, temperatures have fallen. Mike Robinson, who is behind the technical desk, is very happy because he said it will get cold at some stage this winter. Where are we going to start? Well, I think it's over to you, actually, Mike, and a story about a policeman who was arrested.
Yes, so this is about a gentleman called Anthony Carlin in Northern Ireland, and the newsletter article here is from Tuesday. It says a serving policeman was warned on Tuesday he could be jailed for allegedly approaching one of Northern Ireland's most senior judges and threatening to arrest him. Lord Justice Gillen told Thomas Anthony Carlin his actions at a hearing in Belfast amounted to prima facie contempt of court. He has been given until Thursday to secure a lawyer, explain his behaviour, so that's today, and apologise. The PSNI confirmed that a 43-year-old man remains in custody after being detained on suspicion of 2 counts of common assault at the Royal Courts of Justice. Mr. Carlin's outburst came at the end of a ruling in a house repossession case at the High Court in Belfast. He was representing himself in a legal battle with Santander Bank over a property in Northern Ireland. So before I ask John to give us an update on this, I just want to correct some of the inaccuracies and omissions in the newsletter report. Anthony Carlin, as the article says, has been contesting Santander's attempts to seize his property, his home. He had presented evidence upon evidence that this was what was happening, including providing documents showing the bank had been paid in full and that the balance of his mortgage was zero. And despite all the evidence, the judge made a personal attack in the court on Tuesday on Anthony, calling his evidence ill-conceived. He said some other things as well, and he found for Santander in the case. So Anthony felt that as a police officer, with an understanding of what constitutes evidence, that he had no option to arrest the judge. And according to witnesses at the court case, he had considered this ahead of time and had grounds for doing this. And one of the grounds was the Fraud Act, on the basis that if someone withholds information to the detriment of someone else, then that falls under the Fraud Act, and the judge, he alleges, withheld information. There's the Bankers Books Evidence Act, along with some other case law, which should have compelled the judge to force Santander to produce their books and give the court evidence that Mr. Carlin owed the bank money. That didn't happen, and it seems like a pretty basic thing that in the case that someone is claiming that you owe them money, they should be able to provide the documentation to show that, but apparently that didn't happen. So Anthony Carlin's position was that if Santander came to court with evidence that he owed the money, he would have paid them in full, and this was stated in court on multiple occasions, and it didn't happen. And Anthony had told the judge that he could not find... Anthony had told the judge that he should not find against him unless Santander could prove the debt. So he alleges that the judge committed misconduct in public office, malfeasance under common law, and on top of that, he alleges that the judge aided and abetted the attempted theft of his house by Santander. And on the basis of these, the Fraud Act, the allegation of aiding and abetting theft, and the other things we were talking about there, on the basis of those, he felt he had grounds as a serving police officer to arrest the judge. Now, in the process of making the arrest, it's alleged that Anthony Carlin assaulted court staff. But as I said, any of the witnesses, and there were 8 witnesses in the court, say that no such assault took place. In any case, he was a serving police officer, and John, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but a serving police officer has the right to use what he considers legitimate force in order to effect an arrest. But in this case, the police were called and Anthony Carlin was arrested instead. The judge, therefore, once again was rescued. And in fact, he was brought back in front of the same judge later on in the day and told that he would be returning to court today to apologise. Now that court hearing has taken place, I believe, John.
History's repeating itself. This is a parallel with what happened with the arrest of Judge Peake. And for those who've got internet access, if you look up an article, the arrest of Judge Peake on the UK column, it'll explain some of the legislation. Anthony is a serving policeman. He's a sworn obligation to uphold the law. And the point, I understand from witnesses, came when the judge departed from responding to evidence that had been raised in the case and stooped to personal abuse, as described. A constable's got a power of arrest. Everyone's got a power of arrest, and anyone can be arrested. Now, judges have immunity from prosecution, but it doesn't mean they can't be arrested. Under Section 24 of the Police and Criminal Evidence Act, anyone can be arrested. But in this case, rather than prosecute, a report should have gone to, in Northern Ireland, there's a special judicial discipline body. So there's a perfectly accepted procedure for that to happen. I understand that the assault was assault without battery. And as you know, assault is putting a person in fear of unlawful violence, and it's battery if they were hit. There's no question of Anthony hitting anybody. It's just that the two court officials got it completely wrong. And what they did, in fact, was commit a common law offence of rescue. They released a person from custody. And in fact, it's an act of treason. If you refer to the article I mentioned, the arrest of Judge Peake, because arrests are made in the name of the Crown, it's the Queen's prisoner, and anybody that liberates the Queen's prisoner is disrespecting the Queen, and it's treason. So that's how serious this matter is. Anthony's, I understand, has been went to court this morning, and the matter's been put off until Monday. And the reason it's been put off until Monday is Anthony's not cooperating. Unlike happened in Roger's case, where it was allowed to fizzle out, Anthony is insisting on his rights, and the matter's back before the court on Monday. What Anthony's concerned about is that he's been disarmed. He's had his pistol taken off him. For a policeman in Northern Ireland, that is not good. There's no question of his mental health. There's no question of his physical health. It's just his conduct that's caused this. And as a former Federation representative, this is an absolute outrage. Personal safety of members of staff is covered by legislation, Health and Safety at Work Act, if nothing else. And Anthony, I understand, is looking to take precautions. He's a brave man, but he has got a family. It remains to be seen how the Chief Constable responds. The Chief Constable's got a locus for reporting judicial misconduct. In fact, the Chief Constable has input when judges are chosen. There's no reason why Anthony couldn't have taken the judge into the police station, interviewed him just like anybody else, and passed the evidence going to the tribunal, which can be set up to investigate judicial misconduct. As I say, the man's a hero, and he deserves our support. We're on the other side of the water, but publicity is everything. He has got a large group of supporters over in Northern Ireland, and I wish them well. And it remains to be seen how the authorities will react, because you can't do this to a serving constable and claim that you're maintaining the rule of law.
That's a very powerful statement, John. And I'll just say as a personal comment here, I watch judges continually being brought forward to run inquiries. We should trust them because they're a judge. We should trust arbitration because a judge is in the court. We should trust the judge because they're in the court. But in fact, we've got judges now being given power way in excess of what common law would give them.
Yes, I agree. We're going to move on to Tom's case shortly, and the judge again acted lawlessly, disregarding Acts of Parliament blatantly. And there's a price to be paid, and we're going to move on to Guy in a moment. All I can say is, as far as Anthony's case is, the man's a hero, and he's right, and there's nothing can stop an idea as time has come, and that's what's happening.
Perhaps we should bring Guy in, because of course, Guy, you've spent a lot of time in courts yourself and seen judges grossly overstepping their powers, if not committing criminal acts. What's your view on this one?
Well, I agree with John. I mean, Anthony Carling, you know, having done a lot of work in Belfast as well, Anthony Carling is a hero. I mean, he's an active police officer who's put it all on the line to prove what we're saying is correct. And you know, we know the score. Anthony there was saying, show me the evidence and I'll give you the keys. That's exactly, it ties in with Tom Crawford's case. It's exactly what I've done on 2 previous occasions. I've said, look, you know, when we've got a big crowd here, but we're prepared to give you the keys if you give us the documents. And of course, they never show us the evidence. And Anthony's in the same position. But what a brave man! What a brave man!
Okay, Mike, do you want to lead us into matters civil court?
Yes, just 1 second. Sorry. Yep.
There we
okay,
go.
there we go. Right. So this is the interim report from Lord Justice Briggs, and this is following an informal consultation on the future of the civil courts. It was apparently, they say, commissioned by the Lord Chief Justice and Master of the Rolls in July last year to coincide, I'm quoting now, to coincide with the programme for reform of the courts by Her Majesty's Courts and Tribunal Service, and looking at civil court structures and judicial processes more generally. A larger, more formal process of consultation will be completed by the end of May 2016. Written responses are invited not later than the end of February 2016, and Lord Justice Briggs will hold a programme of meetings from March until May, and he will complete his review by the end of July 2016. So they're absolutely ploughing ahead as quickly as possible to reorganise the civil courts. And the urgent priorities that they identify are to prepare the civil judiciary to play their part in the management of HMCTS reforms from April 2016, including judicial college training and staff to support the leadership judges. As soon as possible, to design the structure and software which will be needed to reorganise courts, particularly the online court, ease the burden of the Court of Appeal. Proposals are already due to be made in April 2016, but the report seeks further suggestions. So I wanted to highlight this business of an online court because Justice Leveson has been talking about that for about a year now. This is part of their efforts to, they say, reduce the costs involved in taking court cases in the civil courts. But this is the provisional view of the report. They say this is a clear and pressing need to create an online court for claims up to £25,000 designed for the first time to give litigants effective access to justice without having to incur the disproportionate cost of using lawyers. There will be 3 stages. Stage 1, a largely automated, interactive online process for the identification of issues and the provision of documentary evidence. Stage 2, conciliation and case management by case officers. Stage 3, resolution by judges. The court will use documents on screen, telephone, video, or face-to-face meetings to meet the needs of each case. And the questions that they're asking in this interim report, and I guess this is for written response, the questions are, should the online court be a separate court with its own bespoke rules, or a branch of the county court mainly governed by the civil procedure rules? This report favours the first option, so they want the option of new rules for the online court, which are completely different from the civil procedure rules. And then they go on to say, the next question is, which type of claim should be included or excluded if £25,000 is the ceiling? How much and what types of assistance with IT will be needed for court users? How much, if at all, should one side's costs be paid by the other side? And should any appeal should be to a circuit judge? Now, Guy, I'm going to come to you first because it seems to me throwing out the civil procedure rules here, well, they're not even following the civil procedure rules as it stands. So we're potentially not going to lose anything if they do that. But nonetheless, what we seem to have here is an aim to make it easier for people to lose their property, perhaps.
Well, exactly, Mike. What they're trying to do is they're trying to remove themselves from liability and the actual problem itself further and further away all the time. You know, what a nonsense. An online court. Well, good luck with you getting your documentation. You know, I mean, we've got a hard enough time in the physical world getting the documentation, never mind, you know, on the internet. But yeah, I mean, they're trying to get away from liability at all points. And I mean, Tom's case will show that as well. They're trying to, that nobody will put their name to anything. This is the bottom line in the county and the civil courts. So obviously, if you can batted off to the point where you don't even have to be physically there and get arrested, like the Anthony tried to do in the Irish courts, then all the better for them. I mean, it's a nonsense. It's a nonsense.
And of course, if they start with £25,000, they'll just creep that figure up further and further, right?
Every day in every way.
Guy, just respond to that. You've used the words nonsense. I know that you know how serious it is, but I see this legislation coming in, and there's a few people in our chat room responding while we're talking about this subject, and they're saying dictatorship, and I'm going to say that's the view that I hold. We are seeing a dictatorship being assembled here, and I listened to the language of the document there that Mike was reading out. And it's apple pie and ice cream. It's very soft language. It's got a very squidgy feel to it. But actually, where it's taking us is into a dictatorship where common law has been completely removed. And we are to rely on the judgment of one man or one woman. We don't know what their private interests are. We don't know what their morality is. We don't know what their background is. But we are to trust this single judge running a room as a point of private business. Am I overcooking this?
No, I agree. The common law rule is that justice must be seen to be done, and if it's online between the parties, how can that apply? Live witnesses in front of juries are an essential part of fairness, aren't they, Guy?
Yeah, and I mean, court by proxy. I mean, how far are we prepared to let this madness go? It's insane to even suggest it. The next thing, people will be getting their houses repossessed. They've not even ever been to a court. Something's supposed to have happened on the internet. How do we cure the identity problem in all this? I mean, it's so many pitfalls for it. It couldn't possibly work, and it certainly couldn't work with the individuals that we've got operating inside the court system at the moment, because we can clearly show they're operating in fraud and their self-interests go into property. So it's to me, it's just pure fantasy.
Mike, I think you had a...
Well, I was just going to say, it's much worse than you suggest, Brian, because if you read this report, what they're actually talking about is having the court officers do as much of the judges' work as possible and take the load off the judges.
Response, John?
Not on at all. It's bad enough that it's very hard to get jury trial. They'll have to write a new act of parliament, and I bet they repealed the bit about jury trials in fraud cases in county courts. That's probably the heart of the hidden agenda, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, let's just have a look at how the Daily Mail reported the Tom Crawford affair. This is where 7 defendants were found not guilty after attempting, correct me if I'm using the wrong language here, but attempting to get Tom Crawford's property back. Or
they were exercising their common law right of recaption, which means you can take your property back. This is recognised by the common law, and the CPS accepted that was so. And they also relied on Section 5 of the Criminal Damage Act 1971, which says that anybody can recover any property if they've got an honestly held belief that they're doing the right thing.
Right.
So there we go.
Well, let's look at this article then, because what did the Crown Prosecution Service have to say? They said this case was prosecuted and brought to trial in accordance with the Code for Crown Prosecutors. Included in the evidence were statements from eyewitness accounts from the scene. However, during the course of the trial, the evidence given by key witnesses differed substantially from the version of events described in their statements. Now, I think I'm right in saying that from very early on, the judge was expressing unhappiness. He was saying that this thing has got out of control. Even if I find these people guilty, what am I supposed to do? But no, the Crown Prosecution Service pushed on for 8 days. We've been told that this court case has cost the taxpayer over £300,000. We're waiting for confirmation of that figure, and then it's simply dismissed out of hand. But before I hand over to Guy, because I'm sure you want to comment again, Guy, this is the lady reporter, Emily Kent-Smith. Now, to be fair to her, she's actually given quite a lot of detail around Tom and what he was trying to do. We could say it's quite a sympathetic article because they're back saying, well, this man is a cancer sufferer and he's got enough on his plate without people trying to take his house. But what she doesn't get anywhere near is the fact that no warrant was produced in court, and therefore there's no substantive base to this case. Now, my question is Emily Kent-Smith being a little bit casual in the way she reports, or did she pick up on that, and did we have an editorial team in the Mail saying, well, we don't want you mentioning that? Is this incompetence? Is it cock-up? Whatever it is, the mainstream press, and in this case the Daily Mail, are simply refusing to report the important facts. Guy, I'll let you respond to that.
Well, to read the mainstream media, once witnesses have given evidence contrary to their witness statement, it shouldn't be a matter for the jury. Well, it's complete nonsense. This whole case, and everybody involved in that room, and all the public knew it was entirely about the documents. The judge told the CPS on 2 occasions to reflect, and the reason he said to reflect on this case is because it's in their own codes of practice that they must continually be reflecting. He said at one point that the alleged criminal damage was a summary matter only. It was only in the Crown Court because they'd attached conspiracy to it, and it was for a pane of glass. And he said that the alleged criminal damage was a summary matter only, and you are giving a political platform to these people. If you think it's going to teach them a lesson, then I think you're mistaken. Now, because we were saying, where are the documents? Where are the documents, these mythical documents? And on one day, because I was there at the beginning with John, and we tried to get ourselves as able assistants to them, because they were denied that. They were denied able assistance, whereas the barristers got behind him a solicitor or a clerk, giving him documents and keeping him on the ball, but they wouldn't allow me and John to do that. But this continued and continued, and the documents were alleged to have turned up the day before it got dismissed, and everyone was running around saying, the documents are here, the documents. I was saying, well, fine. We've been asking for these documents since January last year. Let's see if they turn up. And when they did turn up, it was just a bundle of obfuscation through the middle of a supposedly 3-week trial. And of course, the warrant wasn't in there. None of the documents were correct. And, what are they trying to hide? What are these people trying to hide? And why are the mainstream media so keen to keep these things covered up? I think they're giving themselves little gateways where they can have an out at a further time. If the evidence later transpires that we're correct, which it will do, they're saying, we were just informed of this, that, and the other. But I mean, the mainstream media apparently sit in the same courtroom as the public, and the only person in there who thinks that it's because of a cancer sufferer and it's because of witnesses not saying things is the mainstream media and anyone in there who doesn't understand what's going on. I mean, I had a conference with the barristers on the day before it got dismissed, myself and the co-defendants. And what we got to look at, there were 7 people in court, 4 of them unrepresented. Now that's very, very rare, because there can be a mistrial at any time with 4 people unrepresented. They don't like that. They want you all contained within their game rules. And we had a conference with the barristers, and I said to them, now sure, they knew about the fraudulent documents, obviously. And I said, look, surely I understand you're officers of the court and you can't undermine the process of the court, but surely if one of the self-representatives brings up an issue that shows with evidence that there's been fraud inside the county court, it's your job to stand up and say to the judge, hey, judge, I'm an officer of the court and I wouldn't normally be doing this, but as one of the self-representatives brought it up, it's in my client's interest that I follow this through. And only one of them would look at me, and he said, we'd uphold the court's decision. I said, even if it was a fake decision, it was in a private capacity, and they didn't respond. So we pretty much know where we are with these, the courts and the legal profession, and we've got to stop looking at them. If they're in gowns and wigs, let's imagine them in another capacity. Let's imagine with motorcycle helmets and leathers and colours on their back, because that's what they are. They're a gang. And it's quite simple as that. They're a gang operating inside the system.
Right. Okay, Guy, thank you very much for that. Well, if the press doesn't want to tell the truth about what's happening inside Britain's courts, we've got the press, albeit overseas, very happy to stir up hatred and violence. And this just appeared quite incredible. The Guardian here reporting on Charlie Hebdo cartoon magazine at it again. But this is, it seems to me, just appalling. They've picked up on the child the little boy who was all over the mainstream media, washed up, who was found drowned on the beach. And then they put a drawing with two pig-like men with their tongues hanging out, chasing two terrified, screaming women who are running away. And the insert of the cartoon is that the 3-year-old would have grown up to be an abuser of women in Germany. This is obscene, absolutely obscene. What is it designed to do? It's designed to create violence. This is the very thing that Theresa May is saying we've got to stamp down on. And who is supporting this? Well, we've got our own Prime Minister who is saying that he thinks this is a wonderful magazine. And at the same time, in the article that we've now inset there, The Guardian, he's boasting that he's a Christian, but says, oh, well, we're in a free society. Well, I think we're just hearing about our free society. And therefore, you can say what you like. I've actually found this one of the most obscene articles I think I've ever come across. And our Prime Minister, David Cameron, is supporting this organisation with an eye on the clock. What's your view, John?
Well, I understand Mr. Cameron's Jewish, so his mother was Jewish. He comes from a long line of Jewish bankers, so I don't think he's telling the truth there.
Okay, well, have a look at this, because what does he think is really important? And that is, according to Plymouth Herald, he's got upset because in Cornwall they're going to close down a toilet that he likes using. And we've seen in Plymouth and many other cities, all of the public conveniences have been shut. Nobody ever really understood why this was happening. But, you know, it's a serious subject, because if you need to go to the loo, you need to go to the loo. A lot of these toilets were shut, but he says this one should remain open. This was part of the article. He's backed proposals to save a public loo amid fears he could be caught short at his favourite holiday spot. So why doesn't he suffer like all the rest of the public? But I have to say, I spotted that he wasn't a gentleman anyway, because he's left the toilet seat up here. David Cameron, I've got to say, must be the most despicable Prime Minister we've had. Tony Blair scored quite highly, but for... am I allowed to say slime on UK column? I think I'm going to say it. I think David Cameron wins the prize. He's much better on war, which probably brings us back to you, Mike.
Yes. So let's talk about what's going on with NATO for a second, because they are basically saying that they will not agree to Russia's demands to limit missile defences in Eastern Europe because of they're now blaming this, would you believe, on North Korea. So it was Iran. Iran seems to have done a deal. Now we've got a nuclear deal with Iran. So they're not the problem anymore. So now the missile defense shield in Eastern Europe is because of North Korea. Brilliant.
Should we just pop that one on screen?
Oh, sorry, I do apologise. Right. Yeah, thank you. This is a result of North Korea's claim last week to have tested a hydrogen bomb, which they're saying would represent an advance in its capability to strike Japan and the United States. So please explain to me why we need missile defences in Eastern Europe, Brian, if the targets for North Korea would be Japan and the United States.
Well, because the aim is to put pressure on Russia. This is what it's all about. This is why we have to get NATO right up to the Russian border.
But of course, as we mentioned a couple of days ago, Putin is not taking this lying down. And we talked about, we mentioned that Sergei Shoigu, who's the Russian defense minister, had announced plans to deploy, I think it was 5 military divisions to the western side of Russia. What we didn't know at the time was that they intend to form new nuclear regiments. And Shoigu apparently said our main effort should go into strengthening the potential of our strategic nuclear forces and of fulfilling the space defense program. 5 rocket regiments equipped with modern rocket complexes will enter active service in 2016. So they're not messing about.
Absolutely not. Well, I think at least with President Putin, you know exactly what you get. The man talks professionally, handles the international media professionally. He seems to think rationally. And remember, well, we'll say it was an allegation. There was a rumour that it was Putin who was saying, how can I form foreign policy against the US and the UK when their politicians are clearly mentally unstable? Now, that was sort of rumoured over the international circuits, but there seems to be some truth in it.
Well,
so whilst Putin is acting as a president and defending his country, we're seeing some interesting things in the MOD here at the moment.
Well, I mean, indeed, and if you need any evidence that the powers that be in this country are mentally unstable, this is probably it, because the Mirror reporting today that British troops have been banned from firing mortars because they're too loud, and this is soldiers are given ear defenders according to the Mirror, but health and safety staff, they say even these do not guarantee protection against the boom made by the mortars. So basically, they're no longer allowed to fire mortars at full range, and so the range that they are allowed to fire mortars has reduced from 5,000 meters to 2,000 meters, and that's for 81mm mortar shells. What's the point of having an army if they're not allowed to do their jobs?
My opinion on this is all legislation coming in order to help close down the British military. The aim is that Britain does not have a military of any capability. The aim is to reduce it, fracture it, undermine it, so that with the other hand, David Cameron and his treasonous Conservatives can bring in the European army. Before we come back to John and Guy, just run through this one quickly because it's also a military subject. But we were receiving some very interesting information about the anti-malarial drug Lariam this morning. Now, there's been a lot in the papers over many months about this, but medical experts condemn the MOD for giving soldiers a drug with psychiatric side effects. That was the Independent. This is just a couple. There's been a lot of the Ministry of Defence defends the use of the malaria drug. And of course, the good old Ministry of Defence pumps out why it is doing the right thing in giving this drug. But other people have been warning of dangerous side effects. So this was a tragic one here from South Wales, where a young person, ends up dead. And what comes out around this particular case is that she had mental problems after taking Lariam some time earlier. So it's quite a harrowing story where Lariam appears to be the villain of the piece. Some senior military officers have warned about the drug. So we've got former General Lord Richard Dannett here saying that the UK MOD should follow the US and no longer prescribe Lariam. So nobody can say the Ministry of Defence didn't know about this drug. We've had the local Plymouth Herald, which should be well up on military matters because, of course, of the Royal Navy presence in Plymouth. And here's the headline: Ministry of Defence admits breaching the guidelines by giving Lariam drug to troops. And this is part of that article. It says Mark Lancaster, the Parliamentary Under-Secretary of State for Defence Personnel, told a committee of MPs some troops may not have been given an individual risk assessment to check they were safe to take Lariam, which has been linked to severe depression and other mental illnesses. Now, just think about what's being said there. You've got people with safety requirements, the servicing of aircraft, the flying of aircraft, the handling of weapons, explosives. You don't need people who are suffering psychiatric effects as a result of a drug. So most people at this point would simply be pointing their guns at La Roche, who's the producers of Lariam, and saying, well, these nasty drug companies, but there's more to it. And we were told today that a meeting took place last week at Headley Court. Now, this is the Ministry of Defence Rehabilitation Unit for military personnel who've suffered injury. We were told that there was a meeting between senior La Roche people, that's the manufacturers of Lariam, and representatives from the Ministry of Defence, chiefs of staff, so the top level of the military, and there were also others. And what was actually said was apparently this. It's alleged that basically La Roche turned on the Ministry of Defence and said the problem is that you are administering the drug incorrectly, you're giving it as a cocktail with other medication, and the point here is that the side effects are very clearly known. They've been known for very many years, and so La Roche is turning against the MOD and saying the problem is you are giving these drugs as a cocktail. Now, NHS, if you read what they have to say, it's all glowing. There isn't too much on side effects, but at least something is admitting. But the moment this drug gets into the hands of the Ministry of Defence, then apparently it's handed out like Smarties. This was Dr. Ruth Howlett Shipley. She was the public health consultant and armed forces health consultant that was busy saying, yes, we're going to administer Lariam before troops went off to the Ebola campaign in Africa. And we know that people suffered adverse side effects. So this is the meat of it. There was a parliamentary session on the 1st of November 2015, and Dr. Francis Nichol, head of drug safety for La Roche, told parliamentary committee that the side effects were well known and warned again that the problem was the incorrect use by the MOD. Now, one of the things that the manufacturer says is that people who take Lariam should have a red card saying they're a user, and that would alert anybody else needing to make any medical intervention. So they're aware that this drug's being prescribed. Ministry of Defence not used any of the red cards. The Ministry of Defence ignored warnings as to adverse effects and continued to order military personnel to take the drug, even when a person in the military knew they had side effects from the drugs. They were bullied essentially into taking a drug which caused them trouble. And now it appears that MOD has broken the La Roche medical warning guidelines, including cocktails with other drugs, and you get a conflict of effects. And we've used the word threat here. We've heard this on several occasions, that serving military personnel were told they needed to take the drug or they were going to lose their job. And we believe, should come up at the bottom, maybe it's not, let's just see what happens. Oh, it's going to come in here. Basically, the Ministry of Defence has about 17,000 doses which they're ready to give out. So Ministry of Defence puts people at risk in war zones and stabs them in the back, it would appear, by administering a drug in a way which makes it dangerous. John, it's pretty incredible, isn't it?
Well,
when we see this?
what's the problem with the present generation of senior officers then? They're the weakest link, it would appear.
Well, in my opinion, cowardice.
Yeah.
They simply refuse to stand up against politicians, and we've been told over recent months that increasingly junior civil servants are treating top military officers as if they're dirt. And these men seem to have no guts to actually stand up and defend it. It's all going to get better though, Mike, because we're going to, what are we going to do?
Complete constitutional change. We've been talking about this for so long now, and the agenda moves forward. So this is a new recommendation for a new Act of Union. This has come about because of the notion of Scottish independence, of course. And what this article in the Herald says is proposed laws are being drawn up by cross-party politicians to create a new Act of Union that would, quote, wrest back the initiative from the separatists and save the 300-year-old United Kingdom by creating a bottom-up federal system. So this is basically Labour peer Lord Hayne, a member of the steering group of the Constitutional Reform Group, and he said, what is distinctive about the model we're proposing is whereas devolution up until now has been a top-down process, this is a bottom-up process. And the Welsh Secretary, the former Welsh Secretary, that's Hayne, said that England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland would federate towards upwards to the UK and decide what's done at the centre and at a national level. So At first glance, of course, this might appeal to people, the idea that that local or that the individual nations look after their own affairs and they only come to the federal government whenever they need to do something at a national level. But this absolutely turns the Constitution on its head, John, and it is unconstitutional. Is it treason?
Well, a constitution, if it's to mean anything, is sticking by what's gone before. So for members of Parliament to think that they can alter the constitution is a nonsense. The Queen promised to rule according to our laws, customs, and statutes agreed on in the coronation, and consequently, she can't pass a statute which contradicts our laws and customs. So
she's done this many times, though.
Well, although she has, not do it lawfully. It's like the Human Rights Act, big thing, sort of 1998 Human Rights Act, and of course it's now about to be repealed, isn't it? Same thing could happen to this. Any act of Parliament is not constitutional because it only has the authority of 600 politicians.
I've just noticed that Martin in the chat room is saying that a bill to establish a constitutional convention is currently going through Westminster.
Well, Martin, I'm going to have to look that up. I wasn't aware of that because the Common Law Constitution Convention is what's happened when you've had a revolution, when the people have risen up, as you know, confirmed by Chapter 61 of Magna Carta. They probably mean something different, don't they?
Let's just say that if Martin and John didn't know that, they haven't been watching the UK Column News. Anyway, in other news then, this is spectacular because we're now going to have a new master's degree for civil servants. This is to support better policy making, apparently. This is Chris Wormold, and he is head of the policy profession at the civil service. And he says he's keenly aware for the need for policymakers to have the skills and tools to do the best possible job. New approaches in policy making, the increasing availability of data, and the development of evidence-based and behavioural insight techniques all offer opportunities to make better policies that meet people's real needs and save money, of course. It is essential we improve training for policy professionals right across the civil service so that they keep up to date with these advances. That is why across government, many colleagues are working together to develop a comprehensive description of what the policy advisor needs to know and do from beginner to expert level. Once this is complete, we must set out recognised standards we expect policy professionals to reach as they progress in their careers and help to design and test valid assessments. This is in line with the approach taken by some of the more established professions. And to this end, they are creating with the London School of Economics, the Master of Public Policy qualification, and the Executive Master of Public Policy qualification is a part-time degree for working professionals. This is great, with 8 modules to be completed over 19 months. And according to the London School of Economics, this program will follow a similar curriculum to the Effective Master of Public Administration program, but the Civil Service Executive Master of Public Policy program will share some classes with the other one, allowing for networking and exchange of policy ideas amongst a very diverse and experienced set of international students. So that sounds like common purpose on steroids,
yes.
Doesn't it?
Mm-hmm. It does.
It's common purpose.
It is,
it's common purpose.
Yeah.
It's in our faces, and of course the really dangerous thing here is that we've got Oliver Letwin not only controlling the Conservative Party and the heart of government, David Cameron just a puppet on the string for serious issues to do with lavatories, but we've got the so-called nudge unit bringing in applied psychology to change the way people think and behave. Very, very dangerous. It was interesting to see the Daily Mail picked up on Darren Brown doing his stage hypnosis, which included getting people to push other individuals off buildings. I'm going to comment on this tomorrow. And of course, real dangers. You're using applied psychology on people can produce all sorts of effects. It may produce the effect they want in the first place, but later years, depression, breakdown, all the sorts of things we're seeing, particularly amongst young children in South Wales in particular.
I'm thinking the offences against the person at 1861, there's some stuff in there I have to look at. It's not an assault as such, but it's certainly interfering with a person, isn't it?
Yes, and largely without their knowledge,
Indeed,
because
yeah,
of course
yeah.
people do not know about this type of assault, and they have no protection. Interestingly enough, the Daily Mail article was prompted after they'd had an earlier article about this stage hypnosis, and I think the Daily Mail was surprised at the number of people who were commenting on the website, saying this is very dangerous stuff, and can be dangerous for individuals many years into the future. So the government is now using it. What sort of government minister wants to use this type of stuff? Well, let's bring in Theresa May, because this lady is now casually saying, well, yes, I think we may be sucking in customers' web data if they go browsing from a coffee shop. But don't you worry your little heads about it, because we might not, but we may. And she refused to come clean about whether spies, Politics Home is saying here, were collecting medical records and other sensitive personal information. Now remember that we have demonstrated that the Cabinet Office is now totally linked in with GCHQ, but it's also working with Israeli intelligence operatives and Israeli universities, which are specialising in joint projects with the NHS. So at the moment, nobody knows why the Cabinet Office is being allowed to simply hoover up our data, very personal medical data, and share it not only with intelligence services in this country, but people overseas. So we're going to continue to warn people about Theresa May. We think this is one of the most dangerous politicians in the country. A prime candidate for the next Prime Minister, I would think. Guy, we'll just give you 30 seconds if you want to respond to any of those topics we've just covered.
Well, I mean, all I've got to say really, Brian, is the battle lines have been drawn, and it's common purpose versus common sense, and that appears to be what's happening in this country. So which side of the line are you on?
Well, we know which side of the line we're on. How do we deal with this? Well, we've got to expose what's happening and get people to understand it for themselves. One of the things we'll be concentrating on in the coming weeks is the NHS and the fact that we're now seeing what's being described as the most brutal, callous treatment of very vulnerable patients by staff, some staff at least. And we've had a number of people contacting us, emailing us, phoning us, saying we're dealing with individuals who are not acting normally, to which we say, well, of course not, because, of course, NLP has been introduced into the NHS, and we've got common purpose at work. Well, if you think we can trust the church to help us, we're going to ram home a message. We're taking a little look at what the Church of England has become. And we were pointing out that, of course, Archbishop of Canterbury, Welby, is very good at mixing with bankers. He's not so good at turning their tables over. But we were also pointing out the connections between him, Sandy Miller, Holy Trinity, Brompton, Nicky Gumbel, the Alpha Course, which I will state, in my opinion, is common purpose for churches. What they couldn't deal with is child abuse in the country as a whole, and particularly child abuse carried out by the Church of England. But somebody contacted me and said, Brian, did you see this article? And I didn't. It's the Telegraph, and it's pointing out connections between Mr. Welby and not only US intelligence officials, but also MI6 and British intelligence operatives, including this gentleman, former head of MI6, John Sawyers. So we've got the man running the church, mixing with God's bankers, as we're calling them. He's friends with the intelligence services, and he's happy to use George Soros reports undermining Christianity. What's his agenda? I think it's the destruction of the Christian church in UK. And personally, I don't believe this man is a Christian. Guy, I'll just give you a response on that one.
Well, I'm not really much of a religious person, really, in some ways. You know, I think about self-regulation, and if anything, I'm more of a Buddhist in my ways that I am. And self-regulation, that's what it's all about. I mean, if we have to give over, our rule to another, then we've got a problem. We should all be regulating ourselves. That's basically what I've got to say about that, Brian.
Okay, that's fine. I accept that. John, same question.
These people are exposing themselves blatantly now, aren't they? So that's good, because it means I've said before, the test is not the newspaper article; it's what's said in the comments below, isn't it? So I think the population are waking up to these people.
Okay, well, that's it. Thank you very much, Guy and John, for joining us. Some really important topics we feel in the news today. Tomorrow we'll be joined by David Scott from Northern Exposure. We'll be back on constitutional issues and the breakup of UK if we allow it. And for the ladies watching us today, of course, a warning: if you should go into a lavatory and find the toilet seat up, you will know that probably the Prime Minister has been there before you. Thank you very much for joining us. We'll be back same time tomorrow. Bye-bye.